Oh, that's a little bit small, isn't it? Boop, boop, boop. There we go. That's too big. Hello, good morning, and welcome to our weekly coffee chat. My name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my YouTube channel is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And as usual, I've got a number of things to talk about. I actually removed a lot of stuff this week because we had too much to talk about, and I did some winnowing. So we're going to start off talking about research as usual, and then we have a lot of practical stuff to talk about this week. So, jobs, updates, software packages, just like advice that I think is good. God dang it, sorry. My hair is just being very unruly this morning. So I'm just gonna, we'll live with it. That's just what it looks like. And then we'll talk about politics. So things like court cases, legislation, related things, and very small ethics section today, but we will talk about some ethics stuff. And then finally, always like to end on a little bit of a high note with some just like fun stuff at the end to, we talk about some heavy stuff, and it's nice to have a little bit of a leavening in there, if you will. So with that, let's kick off with the research. Get everything adjusted. Get in there. I think I slept on my hair weird last night, and it's not cooperating the way I would like it to. So research. And oftentimes when we talk about research papers, I'll just go directly to the paper, but a lot of our papers today had a really good discussion about them on Twitter. So instead we're going to talk about them, looking at the Twitter links, because I think it's helpful. I don't know, one of the things that's really nice about working in ML right now, oh, my shirt's a little bit see-through, like it's being picked up by the Chroma Key, is that we have a very active online research community where everybody talks to each other. So that is nice to have, and you can eavesdrop on it even if you're not in the field, but I'm assuming a lot of you are, so good to sort of understand where people are and what they're thinking about. All right, so this first paper, we're not actually going to look at the paper, but this comment is from Francesco Herrera, who is a hearing linguist, so not deaf, but studying Peruvian Sign Language, LSP. And if you're wondering why Peruvian Sign Language does not, initialize to LSP, it's because this is a initialization of the Spanish name is usually for sign languages of South America. What that is. And so we've talked on the channel a couple times about how easy it is to do a bad job if you are working with sign language and aren't working with the deaf community and haven't learned about sign linguistics. And this is just it's just the abstract here, but I cannot imagine that the quality of the paper overall is much better. And I'll just talk about some things and like reasons why they're highlighted here in this abstract. So it's a literature review on sign language generation from this series that is lecture notes on data engineering and communication technologies. So I will say first, right off the bat, this is not an NLP publication venue. I haven't actually heard of this one before. Not to say that it is bad. That is just my, the background that I have on that, which is to say not much. This publisher tends to publish more sort of in the math domain. I think all the books I've personally owned by them have been like in statistics or math or simulation or computer science. So not super focused on the NLP side of things. And it's from Springer. And just some specific issues with this. So, first of all, if you're talking about the deaf community, certainly in the United States, deaf is the proper way to refer to it, and with a capital D rather than a lowercase d. It's considered very offensive to say deaf and dumb. So dumb means being unable to speak. So not only is that not true, a lot of deaf folks can speak, but it also, is taken to mean unintelligent, and that's not the case. Being deaf has nothing to do with your intelligence, only one of your senses. So right off the bat, yes, actually, Dano's comment there was actually filtered as offensive by YouTube. Yes, so... And I think that these authors might potentially not all be native English speakers or from the US. Again, I don't know that much about the authors, but in the United States context, that's not cool. Don't do that. And then there's some discussion down here that is just not true about sign languages, and particularly something else that sticks out to me here from this abstract is that the title is a literature review on sign language generation, but then the discussion down here is about translation, which is different from generation, right? And specifically translating from English to Indian Sign Language. How did the statement like that make it through publication? Well, I would guess that the peer reviewers who reviewed this were not... did not have the necessary expertise, right? Which, it's hard to find peer reviewers for something. It says even YouTube knows the basis offensive they do. It's hard to find peer reviewers, particularly if you're working on multidisciplinary work. And so off the top of my head, the research teams that I know of that have worked on sign language translation in a computational setting there's some folks at Gallaudet University here in DC in the United States who are working on it. There's a team at Microsoft out in Seattle. And I think there's also a big team at Microsoft in China working on one of the Chinese sign languages, one of the sign languages used in China. And it's not my key area of expertise. And I think there's also some folks in Europe working on it. And I don't know that much about the Indian Sign Language research community. So yes, but then the other things that are highlighted here is just wrong, right? So sign languages have a very limited set of words. I mean, all languages have a limited set of words, right? Sign languages do not have a vocabulary that is any smaller than any other language. The grammar is difficult to understand. I mean, I find the grammar of, Hindi difficult to understand because I don't speak Hindi, right? So if you don't know the signed language, then yes, it's hard to understand the language because that's how languages work. On the contrary, spoken languages across the globe have a rich vocabulary. So this is sort of creating this idea of a hierarchy where spoken languages are up here, they have a rich vocabulary and an easy to understand grammar. And those poor impoverished sign language users have to use this system. And to be clear, I'm sort of... Maybe it's a little bit of a straw man. I don't know that this is the belief of these authors, but it is sort of what they are describing in the text. And that's just not the case. Sign languages are full languages. They have grammar. Obviously, there are some differences between signed languages and spoken languages, but from a linguistic standpoint, one is not more or less complex than the other. It is difficult for signers to understand a spoken language. I mean, sometimes, for some of them, you know, lots of people who sign or have learned a sign language are hearing, right? They may have learned it to communicate with deaf folks in their life as part of coursework. I mean, I've studied American Sign Language for many years. I'm not super great at it right now because I haven't, you know, been in a signing space recently. But, you know, it was a way for me to communicate with my colleagues who are deaf, and you know, I used to go to like a little coffee meetup every week where we just sort of like sat around and chatted in sign language. And I would say that the bigger issue for at least the folks that I've talked to is not that it is generally not that they have an issue communicating with hearing folks if they are deaf. It is that they often feel left out of conversations and sort of isolated in that way when they're not included and it's not an accessible environment for them. And I think it's really interesting that there's that line in the abstract, and then the paper itself is not about, you know, ASR for deaf individuals, but instead it is about translating to Indian Sign Language. I should also say, certainly in the United States, most deaf folks can read English perfectly fine. And in fact, deaf children, or I shouldn't say just deaf children, but children who are raised in a fluently signing household, right? So these are not children who are raised with baby sign language, which is it's a whole weird thing, but like are raised in a household with signing adults and deaf adults, actually learn to read faster than hearing children or children raised without that input, because part of American Sign Language is a system called fingerspelling, which is a transliteration of words into that sign language, right? So, you know, the fingerspelling for bus, for example, would be BUS. And it's also been, that term in particular has been lexicalized to you know, bus, rather than, you know, doing each sign individually. So yes, translating from a spoken language to a written language is usually perfectly fine for signers. Not always necessarily, but I would say that, you know, again, for the folks that I've talked to in the deaf communities that I've been a part of, that has been their sort of desire more than having a English to sign language system. So anyway, a whole bunch of things here that tell me that these researchers probably aren't doing research that is being led by members of this community, and also are sort of focusing on the wrong problems, or not the wrong problems necessarily, but the problems that, based on my experience and my interactions with the deaf community and deaf sign language researchers, is not the primary issue of the community. So overall, not great. Hi, Gorkum. And I would say, you know, if you are interested in working on sign languages, right, they're beautiful, interesting languages. I think people tend to be really drawn to them. As a linguist, I find them particularly interesting because they help to show expand the envelope of what can be grammatical, right, and what can be folded into a grammatical system and used productively to encode language, which I find you know, a lot of my research in grad school was on sublexical units, so like speech sounds and tones and characters, and then in sign language, like what is it that you can use to encode language? What can move from being, you know, representational to grammatical and enter the linguistic system? Anyway, sign languages are great. If you're interested in learning sign languages or working on sign languages, you know, learn sign languages first, the language of interest, and then B, really work with the community that you are interested in working with, right? And figure out what they actually need, and then build that, and then that will get used and be good, and no one will make fun of you online. Not that I'm making fun of these authors online, but to me, if I were reviewing this paper, it would not have been published. So let me put it that way. And I think they have a lot of work to do to integrate with the communities that they're interested in working with and make sure that those community needs are front and foremost. All right, next up. So this is interesting. And this is, I believe, a preprint. Sorry. The sort of idea here is that it's looking at automatic summarization, and they found that the GPT-3 zero shot, well, I mean, I believe they were providing one example, so few shot. Summarization did a better job than any of our fine-tuned models. And these fine-tuned models are, you know, non-GPT-3 based, I believe. And human likes the summaries better, but our metrics think they're much worse. So for me, what I think is really interesting here is a mismatch between human preference and metrics, rather than necessarily that GPT-3 is doing a good job, right? Particularly because these tend to be on news stories, and you know, summarization of news stories is very well represented in the GPT-3 training data, so like not a surprise to me. That's fine. But I do think that it's really nice to have an example of a place where metrics are not aligning with human judgment, and then trying to figure out sort of why that is and what's going on. Anyway, so these are some of their examples. This is a, you know, various ways that they did it. They used constraint on length. They asked for a focus on a specific thing. And then they looked at human preference. So the three models that they were looking at were GPT-3, Brio, and T0. I would say that these are systems that I'm not super familiar with. And then they looked at agreement across annotators, right? So which was the most preferred and which was the least preferred. Yeah, so I think it was just, it's an interesting project. And I would say if you're, right, so the other thing is, A, GPT-3 has seen a lot of examples of this, but B, the fine-tuned summaries have been fine-tuned on a metric, right? And if those metrics have a disjunct from human judgment, then it is very possible that the issue is not fine-tuned models per se, but rather the metrics that they've been tuned on. And by changing the metrics and finding ones that are more in line with human judgment, it may still be that a smaller fine-tuned model is a better choice than GPT-3, and that the fine-tuning is sort of moving them away from human preference, right? So yeah, interesting work, and we'll you know, we'll see what happens with this. And this is by Tanya Goyal from University of Tennessee, UT Austin, computer science. All right, next up. Oh, this one was really interesting. So this was accepted from NeurIPS, and we're going to be talking about a lot of NeurIPS papers and then EACL papers in the next little bit, because the acceptances are going out for those. Nope. EMNLP, sorry, not EACL. EACL is the European one. EMNLP is just one of the ACL conference's empirical methods in natural language processing. So this was, I thought was a really interesting paper, and we've talked quite a bit about adversarial attacks on models on the channel, especially recently. And I think that this in particular is cool. Good to know. So basically what they found is that any, you know, proxy reward function is hackable or gameable. And basically what that means is it is possible to replace a reward function with another reward function that decreases as the true reward increases, right? So here we have the true reward in blue, and you can see it's increasing, and then it's decreasing over training time, whereas the proxy reward continues to increase, right? So this is a way of tricking the model to be trained to do the opposite of what it was intended to do, basically. Yeah, our definition says a proxy is hackable if improving the proxy can decrease the true reward. When this is the case, we cannot safely optimize the proxy without further assumptions. This could be viewed as a formalization of fragility of value. Yeah, and then there are a couple of questions that they were asking about, like, okay, so there's this, you know, potential threat or attack. What do we do about it? So we can't expect the program to learn the perfect reward function. Can we safely optimize a proxy? And can a proxy capture narrow tasks like do the dishes without conflicting with holistic values like human flourishing? So this is more sort of like general, what's the word I'm looking for? This isn't just NLP, right? This is more general ML, which makes sense because it's at NeurIPS. They were, what they found is that narrow alignment, it seems like did not help as much as they thought it might have. But holistic alignment did, which is sort of interesting. And I don't know exactly what domain they were. I think more in the reinforcement learning and sort of robotics domain. But yeah, anyway, just sort of interesting, very theoretical. And if you are interested, it is now on arXiv. And I would say the interest is, the utility of this paper is more just to like sort of know that it's out there, and I guess think about it. Well, I'm not really a pure ML person, but I came across this one. I was like, that seems interesting and good to know. All right, next up. Right, so this is actually, I would say this is research more like people messing around and finding things out rather than like a published paper, but there are a couple papers that are cited here as well. So the sort of general idea here is that you can see that the sentiment analysis label examples up here are wrong. So the restaurant sucked was labeled as positive. That I would say is a negative review of a restaurant. And the movie was amazing was labeled as negative. But the bar was great was correctly labeled as positive, even though these examples were incorrect, right? And let me stop that. That's very distracting. And the point here is that, hey, if you're lying in these labels, it doesn't seem to change anything. And it's not just like those particular examples, because if you switch the example labels, you don't get any change in behavior. And this is a little bit, it's interesting because it suggests that label example providing might be a little bit more robust than the sort of like prompt hacking, prompt injection attacks we've been seeing recently, where it's like what the task is seems to be a little bit more fragile, which, you know, is a very, very new area of research and a lot left to learn there. But the papers that are cited here, which I think are kind of interesting, is this one, Rethinking the Role of Demonstration. I'll just open it in a new tab. We can look at it together. Two papers that are related to this observation. So this first one is Rethinking the Role of Demonstrations, What Makes In-Context Learning Work, that found that the robustness to label perturbations and label examples is pretty high, which is honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, that's sort of nice that there's stable behavior regardless of the prompt. On the other hand, that's not why they're useful, right? Like ignoring the prompt in a prompting language model scenario, or even ignoring part of the prompt when it's not the intention of the prompter, reduces the utility of the system, right? And then this rebuttal paper, his summary is the ground truth input label mapping is a crucial component for successful in-context learning, right? So basically, if there's been a lot of repetitions of something in the data, and I would say something to keep in mind. So here's the sort of summary of this paper. The thing to keep in mind here when talking about ground truth and language data is something being present in a language data set does not make it ground truth. It makes it present in the data set. Right, so if you read the stochastic papers, Parrot, you'll know that there's a lot of issues with treating a language corpus like ground truth. You know, the black swan problem, people tend to talk about very rare things more than they exist in the world. The existence of fantasy literature, right? Or even in the sentiment analysis context. if I write, dialogue in a story with someone saying, "Oh, I'm gonna kill the king," it doesn't mean that I, Rachel, the author, am planning to kill the king. It means that I am writing about a character who's doing that, right? Like, that's not ground truth. That is a representation of something in text. Anyway, so they suggest here, however, that, what is present in the data set has a big effect on the output, which I think is reasonable. Anyway, just sort of an interesting research program, I guess, research thread that I hadn't come across before. So might be interesting for some of y'all. And then, are those in the right order? They are in the right order. What I think we brought up last week, like this came out right before I was gonna do stream last week, so I didn't do it last week, but we'll talk about it this week. So OpenAI has a new ASR system. Yep, for English, and I think the thing that is most notable for me is that the specific training data is not super clearly discussed, right? So if you check out the model card, in the training data, right? I would expect, right? This is not a lot of information on, 680,000 hours of training data and transcripts collected from the internet. A lot of it was in English. Some of it was in other languages. The non-English data represented 98 different languages. Okay, where did it come from? What's the domain? Who, right? What were the sociolinguistic characteristics of the speakers? A lot of like questions that I have about this data that they just don't answer in the model card. And it sounds like, some other folks were also really interested in that, right? It's like, where's the data coming from? There's a lot of them, and they also do remove a lot of transcripts that look like they were generated by ASR, so that's good. You don't have sort of like models being trained on model output. Yep. Anyway, just sort of interesting, and then a lot of stuff on here, and sort of similar to Libra speech in terms of performance, I'm assuming here, rather than actual input. Oh no, they do have this. Okay. This should be in the model card. Wait, no, this is not training data. This is testing data. Yeah? Trained on 30 segments. Anyway, I want to know more about the training data and its source, and also the sociolinguistic characteristics of the data donors. Yeah. Anyway, next up. I don't know, maybe we'll read the Whisper paper and talk about it a little more. I haven't had a whole bunch of time to dig deep into it. I have been very busy. Very busy. Both of my teaching contracts started this week. So another paper. I'm going to have some coffee. Wow, I'm very tired. I'm just now realizing. Anyway, another paper from the Oxford Handbook of Language and Sexuality. Handbooks generally tend to be made up of chapters that are contributed by every chapter, is usually contributed by a different person based on their area of speciality, right? So like I've done a handbook chapter on sociophonetics for ASR and NLP. And I thought it was open access. Anyway, I guess it's not open access, but this chapter talks about intersectionality. So if you're not familiar, intersectionality is a term from, one sec, let me look it up so I have the correct citation for you. Kimberly Crenshaw? Let me double check that. Yes, Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an academic. And basically it's the idea that, you know, people's identity along multiple facets overlap and interact in a way that is not, you know, right. It's not in mathematical terms, you know, it's not purely additive, right? People's experiences and backgrounds all come together along many different facets. I don't know. Does that make sense? If you're not familiar with the term of intersectionality, I don't know that helped much, but, and this is talking about specifically how that relates to language data, right? So here, the multiplicative effects of overlapping systems of oppressions on individuals' experiences, and how that, you know, relates to language usage. And it builds on Black feminist scholarship to explore how semantic bleaching is the removal of meaning through repetition, has shifted understandings of intersectionality in public and academic discourse over time. And I would say it's a term that you would definitely hear outside of academic circles now in time, contending that the process is undergirded by a failure to engage with the architecture of race and racism. This chapter demonstrates how neoliberal conceptualizations of identity obstruct intersectional analyses of systemic oppression. A review of sociocultural linguistic scholarship on race, gender, and sexuality surveys, that is a verb, representative work in the area. Adding to that line of research, the chapter examines the linguistic construction of Black queerness and concludes by suggesting a number of ways to integrate intersectionality more fully into the fold of language, gender, and sexuality research. So yeah, if you are working on any of these areas, I think this is going to be, well, yeah, I think even if you're not yet working in these areas, handbook chapters are usually pretty good introductions to things. But I think pulls together a lot of threads that are very relevant to people working with language data, right? Because all language data is human data, and it's important to think about the humans. So, and the chapter is The Real TD Language at the Intersections by Dondre, apologies if I say anybody's name incorrectly, Miles Hercules. All right. Next up, so this is a paper from, I guess, just the eCommons at Loyola. What was the publication venue? Conference proceedings. It was ACM. Scored was the publication venue. Well, I guess it's coming up. It's not yet November. And I thought this was particularly relevant because, again, we've been talking a lot recently about, you know, security risks and adversarial attacks on particularly large language models. And this paper looks at artifacts and security risks in the pre-trained model supply chain, right? So like if you're making an API call, how did it get to the point where you could make that API call? And I'll pop the link to this in the chat as well. I think this is probably the most directly relevant of everything that we've talked about to you all so far. Ooh. Sorry, my brain is currently taking a nap. Come on, wake up, more coffee. Deep neural networks achieve state-of-the-art performance on many tasks, but require increasingly complex architectures and costly training procedures. Understatement. Engineers can reduce costs by reusing a pre-trained model and fine-tuning it for their own tasks. To facilitate reuse, engineers collaborate around model hubs, a collection of pre-trained models and data sets organized by problem domain. So like TensorFlow Hub, Hugging Face, I guess technically GitHub. Although model hubs are now comparable in popularity and size to other software ecosystems, the associated supply chain has not yet been examined from a software engineering perspective. We present an empirical study of artifacts and security features in 8 model hubs. We indicate the potential threat models to show that the existing defenses are insufficient for ensuring the security of pre-trained models. We compare pre-trained models and traditional supply chains and propose directions for further measurement and tools to increase the reliability of the supply chain. And the model hubs that they looked at were here we go. Hugging Face, TensorFlow Hub, Model Zoo, PyTorch Hub, Ong's Model Zoo. I don't think I'm familiar with that one, but it's on GitHub. Okay. Model Hub, NVIDIA NGC, and the MATLAB Model Hub. I'm trying to remember the last time I talked to somebody who was like training a deep neural net in MATLAB. It was a minute ago. Let me put it that way. Yeah, 60. So yeah, anyway. And they talk about sort of security risks and stuff. So if you're using any of these, let's be honest, any of these model hubs, Hugging Face or TensorFlow Hub, probably good to know about. And then finally, also on the supply chain, actually, we have this paper, which I believe is a preprint. Let me double check. It doesn't have any front matter. Anyway, I'm gonna assume it's a preprint. On basically like, hey, you know, what are we responsible for as engineers? And I think something that, you know, obviously that's good to ask. I think we should all be asking that about ourselves, but they make the point that just like with the pre-trained models, you know, you are not building everything from scratch, right? You're using, you know, other people's models, other people's libraries, and what does that mean for doing stuff responsibly? And this is a collection of interviews with 27 AI engineers across industry, open source, and academia. They did not see the questions posed in responsible AI guidelines to be within their agency capability or responsibility to address. And we use Lucy Suchman's notion of located accountability to show how responsible AI labor is currently organized and to explore how it could be done differently. Right, so a really, I don't know, I think it's a good exploration of distributed responsibility and accountability, and how we deal with that as engineers, right? And, you know, I think there's a, Opsuno says, supply chain, heart. Who doesn't love a good supply chain? That works well. Definitely top of mind for me recently. Yeah. So, and I think it's also always very helpful to hear from peers, and I like this sort of like interview format. So I will pop this in the chat as well. All right, and that is all the research. Thank God. I don't think I can say anything smart about any other research today. Practical stuff. All right, so hopping right on in. We talked a little bit about Whisper, and I happened to run across this project that somebody had shared on building a multilingual assistant. And if you've not worked on assistants or chatbots before, multilingual stuff is very difficult. And I thought it was just sort of an interesting, you know, an interesting project, an interesting approach, and also the sort of building blocks that let's say UV here put together was a little bit surprising to me. What was the previous one? So the one I just shared was this one on the AI supply chain and responsibility. And then the previous one was on security risks on model hubs, basically. And they talked about these model hubs and found that, hey, there's pretty big security risks, so just be aware. And this one will be coming out at Scored 22, which will be in November. So I thought it was interesting because it's on Hugging Face, right? It uses Whisper, which just came out, Bloom, which came out pretty recently, those embeddings, and then Koki text-to-speech, plus Gradio block. So just like a really interesting little like project that has a lot of connections between those things. So yeah. And it is on Hugging Face. I guess I can pop the link for that in the chat as well if you're interested in checking it out. Can I share the link? Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, I must have shared that link before you joined. Opsuno. There you go. Boop. All right. Next up. We've got some jobs. So RStudio / Posit is hiring. We actually talked about them on Tuesday on the like companies ranked by how willing I'd be to work for them, and RStudio is definitely one of the companies I'd be willing to work for. So there is a role for developer educator working on Tidyverse packages, and then a developer advocate for Quarto for publishing on Quarto. So if you are interested, check them out. And also hiring is Cohere, and here they're looking more for researchers in NLP, and their scholars program, I believe, is specifically for students, and they're having on October 18th, they're going to have a session on basically how to put together an application. So if you're interested in applying, I would attend the session to learn more. And I believe this is on to Sarah's team, and Sarah is great. Yeah, you're very welcome, Joan. Next up. Right. So actually, I think I have these in the wrong order. Yeah. Background, there is a plugin for Firefox. There's a lot of plugins for Firefox that will, auto-click reject cookies for you if you get those like cookie pop-up banners, particularly if you're in the EU or have a VPN that says you're in the EU. Basically just gets rid of them and be like, hey, reject all. And this type of tool has really been, increasingly popular. And in response, a leading consent pop-up provider, OneTrust, has filed a pop-up to make it impossible to use automatic tools to interact with them, like Consent-O-Matic, right? I guess the news here is that there is a little bit of an arms race with trying to get you to click on those little pop-ups and not having to click on those little pop-ups and instead just sort of automatically rejecting them and having the same settings for every site. So you watch this space. And this, I think, is mostly interesting because I will be honest, I can't keep up with all the little startups, man. There's just so many of them. But I know some of you are currently, or probably will be in the future, looking for jobs. So I think it's good to have an idea of what sort of stuff there is out there. And these are different companies that are using large models. And I don't, can you see all of that? You can't. Let's make this a little bit smaller. There we go. And I don't necessarily know that all of these are for sure using large models, but I don't know, maybe they are. And a bunch of different companies that are doing different stuff, right? Some of which we've talked about on the channel. Actually, Replica may be completely rule-based. I don't remember. I think they might be rule-based, or at least some of their stuff is rule-based. Last time we talked about that and looked into them. Grammarly we talked about, Cohere we've talked about quite a bit. Haven't really talked about This is just an aside. I am so frustrated with the proliferation of like AI generated text with affiliate marketing links to get you to click on the thing and buy it, right? So if you're looking for something specific, like the top 10 sites are all like, we've ranked the top 18 air purifiers, and you click into it and you're like, this was written by a robot for the express purpose of affiliate marketing and trying to get me to buy stuff from Amazon, which I don't do. Anyway, I hate it. That's it. I don't like it. Also, all those things that say stealth there just mean that there is a company there that hasn't yet gone public. So it's more for the count than for what the specific thing is. What else have we talked about on the channel? We talked about Otter AI. Yeah, interesting. Koki isn't on here. I think I mentioned DeepGram recently. DeepGram's not on here either. So I don't know that it's a super complete thing. Also, is AI Dungeon like a company now? Interesting. I wonder what their monetization model is. I wonder how they're doing. Yeah, just a bunch of different things. Descript I have used. I know they do. They make it much easier to. When I do videos that have hand-done transcripts, I do a first pass with Descript and then correct them by hand. Yeah. So if you're looking for places to work, this may be, a place to get some ideas. And then also there's a lot of discussion of additional things that a lot of discussion of additional companies that people are bringing up. And I will say, again, if you're thinking about working in these are a lot of very new applications. And if they are heavily relying on, large models, just be aware that things are going to change pretty quickly in a legal landscape in the next little bit is my strong, firmly held personal belief. So FYI. All right. And then this is from Harriet Pibble, who is a community manager at Pickpock Games, director and producer at Circa Theater, and a voice artist, and talking about her thoughts as a professional in the space on using AI technology for voice work. And I know we've talked about a lot about sort of art and generative art recently, and I imagine we'll continue to talk about it. And my feeling on it is that if it is a labor-saving thing, that's fine, right? Like if there's no way a game would ever been able to have voice actors and it just wasn't in the budget, and instead they use, AI voices and like you as a player have a choice not to listen to them, then I think that's fine. If it opens up new things that weren't previously available. But if it's, cost of labor avoiding, I think I put it once, right? And a game would have hired human actors, but they're like, actually, we could make more money if we just didn't. And that's the thing that it's used for. That I feel less good about, right? So, but this is Harriet's discussion about, the issues here. Has a lot of potentially exciting uses, especially for demos, placeholders, and prototyping, which again, labor saving, right? But probably not what you want as a player. For the final product, you will be hamstrung by the experience of the person inputting the prompt, and you're going to lose out on the magic. And if any of you play games that have a lot of vocalizations in them, you know that they are repetitive, so you want them to be good. For example, if you have an interaction where two characters are arguing, so you put in angry, fighting, shouting voices, and it spits that out, it may be exactly what you wanted, but an angry scene performed in an angry way is often tedious, it lacks depth. A more experienced actor will look at the same interaction and play it with something unexpected, something shocking or delightful or vulnerable or amusing or sexy or bitter or repulsive. And two experienced actors playing off of each other could be even more interesting. AI is designed to give you what it wants, but experienced actors will give you what you didn't even realize the scene needed. Any actor worth their salt knows that working deeper than the surface of the text, or even playing against, is what creates tension and elevates a performance from perfunctory to exemplary, and you'll never get that with AI quietly fulfilling your every command. Yeah, and then this actually really got me thinking about what I enjoy in voice acting. And it's really surprise, right? Like, what's his, he was the boss in the IT Crowd, and he's one of the vampires in What We Do in the Shadows. What's his name? One sec. Let me look it up. But he has a lot of deliveries that are extremely surprising, right? In a way that is like catchy and interesting, and I don't think would be generated, right? Because they're very variable. One sec. I gotta find this guy's name. So you can look it up. I'm obviously not going to play clips from a copyright show on here. Matt Berry is the person I was thinking of, and has just a very surprising vocal delivery. He was also in The Mighty Boosh. Yeah. And that's what I enjoy about acting, right? It's, you know, the delight of human experience is that you never know what other humans will do. Anyway, just a thought. And this is, you know, a little bit US focused. Sorry for those of you who aren't in the US. But I think a lot of people know about HIPAA, right? Which is the Health Information Privacy and Accountability Act, or portability. Anyway, basically it's what gives you the right to privacy when you're talking to your doctor and lets you move your health information around, and, you know, provides guidelines about that. With your doctor there being the very specific thing. And I think a lot of people assume that if they are using an app or something that is health related, they're protected by HIPAA. They are not. 100% they are not. And not only can they, you know, sell it to advertisers, they can also sell it to insurance companies, right? So yeah, has a potential to affect your, you know, health insurance rates, ability to get health insurance, ability to get life insurance, etc. So yeah, big issue. And I'll pop this in the chat. And I would definitely recommend, you know, passing it on to folks you may know of in the US who are maybe not in technology and didn't know this, right? So particularly mental health apps, right? BetterHelp has sold a lot of user data. And it was sort of a big deal when it came out that this was a thing that they were doing, and a lot of users didn't realize that they were doing it because it's not a protected relationship. Anyway, yep. A little bit of whiplash. Someone was talking about this recently. So this is a Python framework that's a little bit like dbplyr in R. And if you're not familiar with dbplyr, it is a way to basically run SQL commands in an R-like way on a database in R. And this is very similar, but it's in Python. So I haven't used it. I just found out about it, and it looks like it's being pretty actively maintained. But yeah, if you're working with Python and database backend, this could be a big time saver for you. I'm a big fan of dbplyr, and it's really nice to have access to similar functionality within Python. And this is the IBIS project. And I'll pop this in the chat as well if you would like to check it out. All right, next up. We're not even halfway through. So this is a newsletter from The Download, which is the daily edition of the MIT Technology Reviews newsletter. And I think the newsletter itself might be a little bit newer. But anyway, just wanted to let you know it was out there if you're interested in it. And they have sort of a roundup of stories that they've been working on. So this one's about Anne Reardon. If you're not familiar with her, she does a lot of debunking videos of stuff on YouTube, and also is very critical, and I think deservedly so, of the YouTube recommendation algorithm and their lack of ability to, or willingness to, enforce their own terms of service. Yeah, and just, other news, DeepMind's using IR in their chatbots, etc. Right? Story about Russia's internet rulemaking organization doing, intelligence stuff. Yeah, so just sort of a general interesting roundup of tech news, and if you enjoy, the coffee chats, I think also a good resource for you. Yeah, let me know if you like it, Ops. I am. I don't really have any databases I'm interacting with programmatically right now, so I don't have a big need for it, but it does look cool. And I think I probably should have moved this so it was next to the one on your health data being sold. And it's, data anonymization doesn't work is the title. This is a blog post by Tim O'Brien, who from the Tech and Policy Substack. And the sort of discussion here is about how the Federal Trade Commission has announced a new advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which is part of an informal process of notice and comment rulemaking required by federal law when agencies want to create new administrative regulations or rules. An advance notice is sometimes used when an agency wants comments from the public to determine the appropriate scope of its rulemaking or input on specific topics. In this case, the FTC is considering new rules regarding commercial surveillance and data security, and is seeking comments from the public based on specific questions, rating from data extraction practices to protecting children to algorithmic bias to security. He left a comment, and this essay is an example, is basically a version of that comment. The overall, gist is one that I think is not a surprise for anyone who's worked in anonymization or even read about it. And it is that data anonymization can be guaranteed in a situation where someone only has access to a specific data set. And that is straight up not realistic, right? Particularly given that buying data from data brokers is increasingly cheap and easy and accessible. And, right? Like when I was learning about anonymization in, 2015, 2016, right? That was always the caveat, right? Like we can make mathematical guarantees of, K anonymization, L, et cetera, all of the different things that are, all of the different guarantees that you can make are based on a specific data set. And if someone has access to more data sets, theoretically, those guarantees crumble. And the unfortunate fact of the matter is that theoretically someone having access to a bunch of joinable data sets is now very much just the case, right? And as a result, any guarantee of data anonymization has to be considered within the larger social and technical context of easy availability for purchase of people's private information, or information that they would consider private. Clearly isn't anymore, right? Via data brokers. So anyway, a federal requirement of data anonymization is basically meaningless because someone, a company can only guarantee that something is anonymizable given the data that they have access to. And that's, meaningless in a world of joins. Anyway, a little bit of a downer, but I think really good to know about and to consider as more and more legislation is proposed and rules are proposed that anonymization is no longer a good guarantee. And shouldn't be the standard for privacy legislation. All right. And then we have some excellent advice from Lynn Charity, who's fabulous. Arnicus on Twitter. And if you don't follow her, I recommend giving her a follow. Really cool person who has good ideas. She's a consultant at Google Arts and also has a newsletter on Substack. So here are her suggestions on things that NLP consultants should know about. So basic linguistic concepts like the difference between stemming and tokenization, parts of speech, parse trees, semantics, stop words, as sometimes politically important, etc. Cleaning data, right? So removing URLs and commands, maybe tokenizing, possibly software removal, regexes, manipulating dataset files, setting up code, programmatically interacting with files. One of my favorite Python libraries for that sort of general data cleaning is FTFY. Fix that for you. It does a lot of sort of like, especially if it's scraped data, it'll get rid of sort of a lot of the internet weirdness, HTML weirdness. Training data. Labeling is non-trivial. If you were looking for a good tattoo idea, that's a great one. What are you labeling and for what? Entities, spans, classifications, what's the data set you're using? Is it representative? Will it stay that way? How much data do you have access to? Can any metadata help? I'll post the link to this thread actually in the chat as well. And I think these are all, definitely things you should consider. Given how tough the labeling part is, and sometimes data access, you probably want to know about augmentation, weak supervision, using rules to generate data sets to label, baseline models, right? Don't immediately reach for the chainsaw if all you need is a butter knife. Once you've done the baseline, what should you do next? The role fine-tuning, rule, serialization, that's a big one, performance, how to, a system fits together, evaluating experiments, all super, super helpful, good, useful skills. Systems thinking, where does the model plug in? Do you want to favor precision or recall? What's the effect of errors on downstream tasks, right? Where will it be deployed and what will rely on it and what will it rely on? Organizational awareness bonus. Yeah, this is more into the more senior engineer sort of level stuff. Can the degree to the org can't work and make it part of the system with consideration of the goals and moving parts. It may be another ML failure case. That's a waste of time for everybody. And especially as a consultant might mean that you don't get invited back, right? And recommends Inace's video on applied NLP thinking, which, very good video. I would also recommend it. And then also just sort of like other stuff that you should know about. So yeah, really solid advice. If you are looking for, a study guide for getting into NLP, I think these are a great starting point, and all good things to know about. All right. Next up, we have a really interesting piece from the BBC. I'll pop in the chat as well. And one of the things that we talk about on the channel a fair amount is hidden labor, right? So a lot of things that a lot of ML relies on data, right? We all know this. Who makes that data? Who labels the data? Well, a lot of times it is, outsourced to people who live in different places at a very low cost to the outsourcer, right? Anyway, this is just sort of a piece on the Kenyans who are doing the labeling for self-driving car stuff, right? And you can see sort of here's what that looks like, and this is an 8-hour-a-day job, and it's being outsourced through Samasource, a San Francisco-based company that counts Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, and Yahoo among its clients, right? So that's what it is, and it's all human labor. It's all done by people, and I think a lot of the sort of starry-eyed discussion of AI in the US tends to ignore or not consider the labor that goes into it outside of the US. All right. Next up, I know this section's a little bit jumbled, but it's just like, it's what was on my radar this week. This is a really nice, I don't know if you could hear that squeaking. That was my dog. Quality of life feature in Torch. I haven't never really used Torch. I'm more of a TensorFlow person, but I really like this. So named tensors, and you can see here that the dimensions here, dimension C and D, are at the same position from the right, but do not match, right? So it's a tensor dimension mismatch lets you know A, that it's happening before you do things, and B, specifically where it is in the tensor, which lovely, very, very nice quality of life feature. Good job, Torch team. All right. And this is from Amanda Kazari, who is at the University of Vermont right now. Huh, good to know. So if you're not familiar with Kelsey Hightower's No Code project, it's a GitHub repository with no code in it. And by some metrics, Kelsey's No Code project is one of the most critical in open source. 53.7 thousand GitHub stars, 4.6 thousand forks, 453 open PRs, right? Which is great engagement. And if it were an actual open source project instead of a joke, would be very compelling. However, it is a joke, and the people who are engaging with it are doing it as a joke. And Amanda makes the point that it's a really good example of what can happen when you overbias towards metrics. And if you looked at those metrics and were like, hey, you know, this is clearly a very influential open source project, you would not have a good understanding of what was actually going on, right? So good not to rely on metrics, and just sort of a fun example of that. All right. Also, I don't know why it uses this font, but it sure does. So we talked fairly recently about how a lot of the Koki folks used to be at Mozilla on Common Speech, and they left and founded Koki, and it has just surpassed the Mozilla library in terms of GitHub stars, which of course we just talked about. I hope you can't hear that. He's being very, making a lot of laser sounds. But sort of interesting how the growth trajectory of those two projects are going on. So good to know. Oh, do not, under any circumstances, buy one of these devices or let it be in your house. So if you're not familiar with Amazon Ring, they are privately owned surveillance devices that share their data with, you know, basically any government organization who asks. And they have just launched a new thing where it now has a virtual security guard subscription service for its third-party monitoring with its robot, right? So now you can have a little robot cop that lives in your house that you have no privacy protections against. So cool. Don't buy one of these. don't let people you know buy one of these. Yikes. Anyway. Also, Dolly doesn't have a waitlist anymore. Pretty recent, pretty hot on the heels of the Stable Diffusion launch. So, yep. FYI. Also, Firefox 105 is here. So if you use Firefox, I would recommend giving it an update, particularly if you like having a lot of tabs open. Since I have obviously this is Edge because that's what I use just to stream on. Yeah, I've got a lot of tabs open. I'm sure I'm not the only one who uses the internet like that. So if you're using Firefox, probably worth it to update. Next up, so this is a hiring pattern that I've seen quite a lot, and I would recommend if you're a junior person, right, so this is maybe your first or second role in industry, not necessarily gonna set you up for success. Maybe, but not necessarily, right? So Bia here says, when the large company doesn't yet have a data engineering team, but is hiring data scientists with PhDs to run deep neural networks using Spark Hadoop. Like, girl, don't be bashful. Just say you use Excel for data management, reporting, and analytics, and one of the C-suites heard about AI recently and is leaning in. So the reason why I would recommend not taking these roles, particularly if you're more junior, is that you're expected to do stuff with a lot of data, but the data is not going to be accessible or easy to use, and you're probably going to be reporting to someone who does not have realistic expectations of what machine learning can do, timelines, model performance, right? And you just be aware that these can be very uphill roles and very challenging. Yeah, and as this person says, this is how I got my first data scientist job, for which I was not qualified at the time. I'm glad this worked out for this person, but that's not going to do you any favors in terms of your long-term career progression and growth, especially because you won't have any mentorship, right? There won't be anyone there who can like help you do better because it's just you, right? Anyway, yeah, I would personally recommend avoiding these types of roles unless you love adversity. Also on the sort of the newsletter topic, we're going to talk about a couple of newsletters today. The student edition of Diversify Tech is, provides resources for underrepresented students in tech. If you're not from an underrepresented background, they do have an ally edition as well. If you just want to sort of like help diversify tech. And yeah, have examples for like entry-level roles and resources and stuff. So if you're interested in getting into the field and you're from an underrepresented background, I recommend subscribing it and subscribing to it. Opsuno says that was my first job experience in data science too. It was a nightmare. Yeah, not a good time for you. Like, I guess I can see a situation where it might potentially work, but I personally wouldn't gamble on it, knowing what I know now. So we talked about sort of like how not to start doing ML, but what can it look like when you do a good job? And this came out in May, but I think it's still, helpful and good advice. And basically this is, okay, so you're piloting machine learning. What do you do? And there's sort of general advice for that. And Pachyderm, this is from Pachyderm. If you're not familiar with them, does like model and experimental tracking and governance and packaging and stuff like that. And they've been around for quite a while. I think I first learned about them at the last JupyterCon up in New York in like 2018, maybe ish in there. Anyway, so this is just sort of like practical advice of like how you want to do it, right? So like, what's the business initiative, right? What's the benefit to the business of this? And if you did happen to end up in one of those situations, I would imagine like this can be a helpful way to do that. So yeah. And obviously they want you to buy their product, but I think it is sort of general good high level advice if you're starting a machine learning project. All right. And also on Hugging Face, there is now a easier way to do model cards on the Hugging Face hub. Programmatically. So if that's been what's keeping you from updating your model cards, maybe check that out. FYI. All right, politics. We don't have a whole bunch to talk about today, but we do have a couple things. So first off, apparently Facebook has removed a lot of inauthentic accounts in the last little bit, and Twitter. Some of them seem to have been from potentially the US government in some capacity. Folks are being cagey, right? Not a lot of information is being shared, but also removing, it's not just the US, also, inauthentic accounts from China and Russia. Are these state actors? Maybe some of them, question mark. But yeah, so it seems like there's a really big push on Facebook and Twitter right now to remove, accounts doing a misinformation. Interesting. It just went blurry. Fascinating. Anyway, FYI. And then this is Canadian startup news. And I thought it was just like a nice little review of last 10 years of the field and, the sort of current state. And I am pretty fond of, telling you that I'm pretty sure that legislation is coming, regulation, and I'm not the only person who thinks that, right? Anyway, so this is a discussion of the, a discussion of the history of the field and what's happened with a focus on, the Canadian startup scene. So if any of you want the link, let me know and I'll paste it, but I don't know how many of you are in Canada. Also, if you're interested in computer science and the law, this is a monthly workshop that will present work on computer science and the law, right? It's over Zoom, and if you are interested in these sorts of topics, could be a good resource as well. I am not a lawyer, but here, I'll paste this for you, Zax, if you are interested in the Canadian stuff. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, and I think it's going to be, based on where folks are from, a little bit US focused. But also, a lot of tech companies are based in the US, so changes in US law are going to affect everyone. So FYI. Ooh. If we get to the end of ethics, and I haven't talked about, if we get to the ethics section, I haven't talked about the Californian thing, remind me, and I'll talk about that. I don't remember if I put it in here or not. Also, in legal stuff, so I mentioned that sort of like the previous consensus was that generated works could not be copyrighted. Someone is now trying to copyright, or has received their copyright for the first AI. It's the first copyright for AI generated work, specifically for an AI assisted comic. And yes, from New York based artists, Chris Kashtanova has received a US copyright registration on their graphic novel that features AI-generated artwork created by Latent Diffusion, according to their Instagram feed, and confirmed by a public record search by Ars Technica. So yes, a can of worms. So you may remember from last week that Getty, the sort of like image selling site, said that they would no longer be hosting generated images based on copyright concerns. Here someone is copyrighting their generated art, their assisted art, right? Like, it's not completely generated, it has been manipulated after being generated, but yeah. Okay, watch this space. I imagine things will happen pretty quickly. Also, we talked about this when it happened, that Amazon bought One Medical, which is basically like a doctor's office. And the Federal Trade Commission is now investigating it. The FTC basically is in charge of like saying whether or not mergers are legal. Yeah, so we'll find out more about it, but it seems like mostly it's been antitrust groups that are pushing for stopping of this. Next up, so this is something we've talked a lot about on the channel. If you're a regular, it's not going to be a surprise to you. But in the United States, you have a legal protection from unreasonable search and seizure, which basically means if law enforcement wants to learn a lot about you, they should have to get a warrant. But since they can just buy that information, well, not anymore. And there's been, like, particularly this year, there's been a lot of erosion of privacy in the United States in a political sense. Yeah, so this is just sort of like a position piece, like overviewing the fact that, like, hey, you can, tech companies are selling private information and law enforcement can just buy it and not have to, get a warrant or anything. Dana says, I feel like as long as the generated AI copyright isn't owned by the AI and is instead owned by the person, it should be fine. We should just be more cognizant of works being too close to others. I mean, I guess yeah. Like, I don't know how it's going to come down on this. I don't have, a strong, I don't feel like I have a strong pro or con to this. I will say that I think particularly works that are extremely derivative of artists' work. So we talked last week about this fantasy artist whose name was a very popular prompt, and it was a lot of images were being generated that looked like his work, and he didn't like that. I feel like copywriting something like that is a little bit a butt behavior. Don't love that, right? But yeah, I think it's, TBD. Yeah, and I have no idea how this would go for text either, right? Yeah. I don't know enough about IP law to have a strong opinion here. And speaking of privacy, there is in the US a big Senate push. So we talked about Fog Reveal, which is a company actually based here in Richmond, Virginia, where I am, that, sells people's exact location to government organizations, including law enforcement. Yeah, police agencies have been using the platform to search hundreds of billions of records gathered from 250 million mobile devices and hoover up people's geolocation data to assemble so-called patterns of life, according to thousands of pages of records about the company. And it's been used a lot by a lot of people. The tool is rarely, if ever, mentioned in court records, something that defense attorneys say make it harder for them to properly defend their clients in cases where the technology was used. So yeah, and now it looks like there's a push in the U.S. Senate to try and, curtail this sort of, erosion of Fourth Amendment rights, which, I hope it happens. That would be great. And also on sort of, tech overreach. So if you're not familiar with, I believe her name is said Ifeoma Ozoma. Please let me know if I'm wrong. She was at a number of tech companies and really got basically, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, were basically used to harass her after she, suffered some really upsetting discrimination in her work. And I believe that she was one of the main forces behind the California Silence No More Act. Let me get some dates on that. Yeah, which became law in January 1st, 2020, and placed restrictions on confidentiality provisions in certain employment-related settlement agreements related to claims of harassment. So yeah, and this is just, I think, a really good overview of her work, working on that, and her experiences, which were rough. Major content warning for harassment and racism and sexism. So. On the other side of the Atlantic, so it seems like there's a little bit of additional interest in the EU, or more interest than there has been, on banning facial recognition. So this is something that very locally in the US there's been interest in, and very frustratingly, Virginia actually passed a ban on the use of facial recognition by law enforcement, and it was weakened, so it doesn't actually exist anymore, basically. A huge fan of that. Love that happened. I'm not a fan of it, and I hate that it happened, to be clear. But it seems like there's a lot more momentum in specifically in the EU on banning facial recognition, which, to be clear, I am 100% a fan of. I don't think facial recognition has any place in a free society. But all right, and that's all the politics. Not that much this week, and even less ethics stuff. All right, that's the coffee. Oh, why am I so tired today? I don't know. Anyway. So speaking of ethics, this is a summary of Timnit Gebru's talk at the Ghana Data Science Summit recently, from OJ Pass, apology if I'm saying that incorrectly, on Twitter. So one of the things she talked about was the Maori people and their language, where corporations try to take our data for free and sell it back to us as services. Maori is the indigenous language of New Zealand. Aotearoa, I believe, is the Maori name for New Zealand. She also talked about DARE's research using spatial imagery to analyze the economic apartheid in New Zealand? Question mark? I'm not entirely sure where that was. DARE is the... it's her... it is a... research institute which she founded, the Distributed AI Research Institute. There we go. It's a space for independent, community-rooted AI research free from big tech's pervasive influence. Timnit Gebru was very famously fired from Google for being a proponent of ethical behavior, which is what she was hired for. She points out how little the impact of all these advancements in data science have had on things like water and electricity, and how focused they have been on cutting costs and increasing revenue for big corp. Right? So this is, like we were talking about earlier, the cost of labor saving, right, to increase profit margins for companies versus labor saving to make people's lives easier. She highlighted the importance of not having all our data within a single organization, right? So we talked about, anonymization is only guaranteeable in the case of limited access to data, and the more a single organization has access to data, the less anonymization is possible. She also just mentioned that just about 1% of the global data set on genomics, making us underrepresented. So I believe is from Africans, is the elided part there. And her presentation left lots of thoughts on AI ethics, something worth considering in all our investments. And then a tweet from Paul Azunre, if African AI/ML researchers are not careful, the new open source movement championed by the richest global tech companies will become a mechanism for continued exploitation of our human capital and continent. And that's something that we've talked about quite a bit on the channel, right? Is, neocolonialism through the, and technosolutionism. Technosolutionism is a tool for neocolonialism. Karen Howe has a series on colonialism and AI. I'll pop up the link for that real quick. Colonialism. And that talks about these sort of like power imbalances and the issues there. So this is the piece that I was talking about. One of the pieces, it's a series of stuff that Karen Howe wrote. And just to be clear, I'm talking about the Karen Howe who mainly focuses on AI, not the Karen Howe who's also a technology reporter who mainly focuses on surveillance. They are different people, which I did not realize for a little while and was very confused by. All right. Yeah, and just as like another example of what that sort of colonialism looks like that we talked about today, right, is this, use of populations that have been impoverished by historical colonialism to prop up, the neo-colonial order of technology companies and, concentrate wealth in the hands of a few at the expense of everybody else. Not great. That's my review of colonialism. Colonialism, not great. Anyway, where were we? Okay, this one. So this is wild. So churches in the US, is this cut off? No. So churches in the US are encouraging their congregations to install basically spyware on their phones to share everything that they're doing with their church leaders so they can make sure that they're not like looking at porn or doing anything else sinful, which is wild to me. Yikes. Anyway, I feel like that's yeah. Anyway, wild. And I am a firm believer in religious freedom and, living in a religiously plural society. And like, if this is their sincerely held religious belief that this is the right thing to do, that's I guess their personal business, but also that feels like an enormous invasion of privacy, and not a fan of it, especially if it was coercive. Hello, old player. Good to see you. I just heard a radio podcast about that app. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's there are certain denominations, Christian denominations in the United States, that are extremely controlling of their adherents in a way that I think, looking at the technical definition of cults, does count as being an occult. And one of the qualities that make something a cult is being extremely controlling of the behavior of adherents, which I think this counts as. So, yup. Anyway. Next up. Oh, speaking of books. We have not been speaking of books. Let's turn the topic of discussion to books. I'm so tired. Oh, come on. Wake up, girl. Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who you may know of for her work on facial recognition and racial disparities. She runs the Algorithmic Justice League, has a book. Nope, is recommending a book. It is not by her. Wow, I really misread this tweet. Is recommending a book that is not by her, and the book is called Buyer Aware by Marta Teledo. So Marta Teledo here, President and CEO of Consumer Reports. All right, interesting. Makes sense. Reading comprehension today, very, very low. Yeah, and also I would, Dr. Buolamwini is a fabulous researcher, and I would definitely take her recommendation on books. So yeah, if you're looking for something to read, add that to your list. All right. Next up, so this is we're in the ethics section now. So something that's been coming up is more and more students using large language models to complete their school assignments, which as a teacher, I don't love, right? So yeah, like, we knew that this was a potential use case. It's definitely happening. I think the thing here where someone is making other students pay them to generate texts and essays is not awesome. I think, like, the harm here is to the students, right? Like, they are not getting practice writing. They are not learning how to, phrase their thoughts. Do I think that augmented writing is, like, inherently bad, right? Do I think that, using something like a copywriter or automated copywriter is inherently a moral wrong? No, not at all. Do I think that this is duplicitous on the behalf of the students? Yes. Do I think this is cheating? Yeah, it's pretty clearly cheating, right? Like, it's passing off other work as your own. And I guess there's also sort of questions that are unresolved now about copyright and ownership. Yeah. Brett says AI used to rewrite plagiarized text. Yeah. I mean, I don't love it. I don't think it's great. I don't support, the extremely privacy invasive anti-plagiarism software that has, sort of been touted as the solution to similar things. I do support having model generated text detectors, right? Which is probably gonna have to be model specific, unfortunately. But I think that is an important thing to have. And that teachers should have access to that. And I don't think that is particularly privacy invasive, right? Just to see if, like, hey, was this generated? Yes, it was. Okay, well, as an educator, I don't have, like, a great idea of how to get around students doing this. In the long term, they're really just hurting themselves. So, yeah. Anyway, also selling it to other students, that's clearly not okay. And this person knows that it was a bad thing to do and still did it, right? Like, I feel a little guilty about it. Yeah, you should. You should. You are not doing the thing. But, on the other hand, I think if students are choosing not to do assignments, it might partially be because they don't understand the value of the assignment, which might, busy work, homework, I am strongly against, right? Yeah. Graxy says, it feels like we're headed to a dystopian future. I mean, yeah, some things are not so great, right? But, yep. Anyway, also on sort of the ethics thing. So I've talked before about voice cloning and impersonation, and that I don't like it when it's done non-consensually. And I think this is a great example of it being done consensually, both that the person whose voice is being cloned has consented to it, and also that it is general knowledge that this is happening, right? So James Earl Jones is the voice of Darth Vader, who is a character in Star Wars, which is a science fiction franchise. And he is aging and doesn't want to voice Darth Vader anymore, so he has consented to having his voice recordings, which there are a lot of because he's been voicing this character for a very long time, to be used to generate new vocal productions, basically, so he doesn't have to do it. So, yeah. Dana says, one time I saw someone use an AI-generated Piper. The more it typed, the more it plagiarized Wikipedia. Yeah, that tracks. Not just because Wikipedia is open source, but also because there's a lot of weird websites that just also plagiarize Wikipedia. And so it's been repeated a lot in the training data if it's a scraped data set. So, speaking of impersonation, if it is non-consensual and if it is deceptive, I think that it's wrong. I think this is a perfectly fine use of it. I also don't think it's, hurting James Earl Jones, a very famous actor who presumably is perfectly comfortable and well off. Yeah. Brett says, good on James. Yeah. Well, people should be able to retire, And finally, this is behind a paywall, so we can't look at it. But it's basically a piece from the Washington Post on DALL-E and Stable Diffusion. And, the big parts from it that just I think are, issues from an ethical standpoint are a lot of the discussion of people who are working on these projects about the malicious uses of the projects are well, people shouldn't do that. But they can, right? We've talked about Stable Diffusion quite a bit previously. So DALL-E at least has some mitigation measures built into it. Stable Diffusion does not. We talked about recently the discussion that they had on their Discord before launching, where they were like, hey, we know you're going to do illegal stuff with this. Just don't do it on our servers so we don't have, liability for it. And there's also some, discussion of some of the really terrible things that people have been doing and creating, non-consensual images of people, including children. Hate it a lot. Not a fan, don't like it. And of course, the Stable Diffusion guy is all well, it's paternalism. We should let society decide. And when I read it, at least every single one of the comments from people who are in society, don't was hey, I hate this. I wish they didn't do that. So anyway, if you have a Washington Post subscription, you can check that one out. All right, on to stuff that's a little bit lighter and some fun stuff. And today it's all just little jokes I saw on Twitter that I was this is a cool joke. Let's share it. Ooh, I got water on myself. All right, first up. So this is a two-panel, let me voice interpret for you. It's a two-panel comic. In the first panel, we have somebody on a stage holding a guitar and an audience member sitting down, and you have a bunch of bouncing sound lines from the guitar person to the audience member. A sound from a musician on stage bounces off the auditorium walls to surround the audience. And then in the second panel, there's a pigeon looking towards the wall, and the pigeon is saying coo, and it doesn't go anywhere. And it says, the sound from a pigeon on stage does not do this. The reason is a coo sticks. It's a pun on acoustics. Brett says 100-minute stream. Yep. It's very dumb. It's a very dumb joke, but it made me laugh. So I thought you might like it as well. And next up, so Threatening Musical Notation is a Twitter account that does just sort of like funny examples of musical notation. And here there's one for the IPA. They call it Pure Vowel Trapezoid, which is not the case unless they are Canadian, perhaps. Like the A in sleigh is definitely a diphthong. Anyway, I'm just gonna... There's some errors in this in this trapezoid. Hi, Docking. Also, anyway, so very weird. Vowel trapezoids don't usually look like this. They usually look like... one sec, I'm gonna pull one up. So the usual vowel trapezoid for English would look like this. This is just from Wikipedia. Can you see it all? You cannot. No, not helpful. Well, what about on the more details page? There we go. So these are the vowels of American English. We have up in the sort of the pointy bit, E. Oh my gosh. I don't think you can see my cursor. You cannot. All right. So we have, you know, going down the pointy bit, E, A, well, not A, but A, and then at the bottom, in the middle, back here, that sort of open O, U, so those are the vowels of American English. And this is kind of a representation of them, not really. So sleigh, A, in American English is not a pure vowel. It is it's not a monophthong, it's a diphthong. There are multiple sounds in that. And you can see it doesn't quite line up, right? So like I should be a little bit more central than it is. A should be more forward than it is. A is usually above A, again, at least in American English. Yeah, but it is some of the vowels, and they have like funny meme words to represent them. Robbie says a linguist can understand your joke. Yes, this is very much a linguistics joke. Also, for some reason, they've used an uppercase I for the I sound. So it's that sort of like barred I there. It's not a barred I, sorry, but like it looks like an uppercase I, but is actually the same height as a lowercase I. I. Anyway, it was just nice to see a vowel chart out in the wild. Also, O in woke is also a diphthong and not a monophthong. So there's some errors in the trapezoids, but we'll just move on. They could be weird Canadians. Or I should say atypical Canadians. It is not the Canadians are weird, but their vowel space may be atypical for Canadian vowel space if those really are pure vowels and not diphthongs. And this is, I thought it was just funny for somebody to point out. So basically these are all screen grabs of different things on Steam, right? So we have a lot of search bars, we have a lot of drop downs, we have a lot of buttons and a lot of tab menus. And what you may notice is that there's a lot of variety, and they should not have a lot of variety, right? So Higher Salem here points out what's a design system. So a design system would have consistency across a platform or website visually, which this doesn't. And this is, I use Steam. I have literally never noticed this before, and it's the sort of thing that would drive a front-end person wild, and I completely glossed over, did not notice whatsoever. But I will now, right? I'll look at it and be like, it's that thing that the UI people don't like. Bless them. All right, next up. Well, this is the final one for today. So I think this is gonna be, I don't know, I think it's just cool. So this is an extract from Garner's Modern English Usage, irreversible binomials, binomial by two, nomial name and noun, right? So noun phrases that cannot occur in either direction. They have to occur in just one direction, right? So some examples. Oh, that's quite small. Robbie says, do researchers like that normal people don't understand them? Does it make them happy? No, I think it's right. Like, it's something that I understand because I've worked on this, and like anybody could learn to understand this. But it's nice to see something very specialized that you've learned about out in the wild, on Twitter, for example. And yeah. No, it's like if there was a fun chemical table joke, a periodical table joke, a chemistry person would probably be like, look at this joke I found, isn't that neat? Anyway, so here are some examples, and I don't think I can make this any bigger. Unfortunately, I can't. So these are examples of binomials, so noun phrases that cannot be reversed, right? So you can say lost and found, not found and lost. That means something different. More or less, night and day, cost and benefit, high and low, wax and wane. You would never say wane and wax. And these things are very frustrating for L2 learners, so people who are learning English as their second language, because you just have to memorize them, right? Like, how do I know that you can say night and day, but not day and night? Day and night means something different. Wow. Okay, so there's no semantic equivalence between them, right? So night and day means it's a contrast between two things. Day and night means that you've been doing something a lot often, constantly, right? So it's like night and day is like 24/7. Day and night is like, day and night is like 24/7. Night and day is like, I don't know. What's another phrase for two things that contrast? Black and white, I guess. You would never say white and black. You'd always say black and white. Yeah, so there's I think an N-Wave a while ago. I saw a paper about this as well. So it's definitely something that's been studied by linguists. It's really one of those things you have to do with corpus methods. And it seems like most binomials seem to have a preference, right? So for most things that are like X and Y, there tends to be X and Y. You'd never say Y and X, right? There tends to be a slight preference based on the corpus literature. Yeah, and then of course there's qualities of things that can make them more or less likely to come first or second. But yeah, it's just interesting, right? So like research and development, you'd never say development and research. And for those of you who are learning English, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, there's a lot of them. And if you're interested in learning more, yeah, Garner's Modern English Usage 5th edition, we'll have this. All right, so that's all I had today, but a nice note to end on, I think. Brett says, hyperactive UI for gamers. Spit and image. I have no idea. Oh, a spitting image. Is spit and image in here? Yeah, so that's SPITTING space IMAGE. I have no idea what it means, but well, I mean, I know what it means. It means that something looks exactly the same as something else, but I don't know where the spitting comes from or how it's involved. I don't usually spit at pictures, right? Anyway, the original is spit and image. Really interesting. From the Bible. Oh, today I learned. There you go, folks. Cool fact. So that is all I have for today. And before we wrap up, I do want to say thank you to my wonderful Patreons and Ko-fi supporters. For those of you who are on the chit chat level, our next chit chat is going to be tomorrow at the same time as the stream. So I will see you then. We can just talk about stuff. Looking forward to that. Yeah, and thank you very much to everyone who supported me. And if you would like to support me, my Ko-fi is over there. ko-fi, I'm so tired, .com/RCTATMAN. It's also on my Twitter, and I think it's in like the YouTube description and stuff. So it should be findable if you're interested. But thank you. Appreciate having you all today. I extra appreciate all of my coffee supporters. Oh, and if you are my monthly coffee supporter, you get access to all the links for everything that we talk about. So these have already been published this morning, so you can head over to Coffee and check those out if you want to get more information on anything we talked about. Thank you, Learning Lots. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, good to see you too, old player. All right. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll see you, tomorrow for some of you. Otherwise, I will see you on Tuesday for something. I don't know. Maybe we'll read the Whisper paper. I feel like I should do it a bit more justice. Yeah. And I'll talk to you then. So have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon.